Hi, I'm Samuel Prather, Reason user since 2003 and founder of Go Music. Welcome to A Reason to Create. I've been doing a whole series of videos on the way that I mix within Reason, and a couple of questions have come up as I've been releasing these videos, and one that came up recently was about stereo imaging. I used to only do stereo imaging in the mastering process. I would mix and I would pan, but I would leave all the stereo imaging to the mastering engineer. But after having to mix a couple of records myself, there were a couple other options that presented themselves that I wanted to cover for you today. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. Obviously, you can do what you want with your own tracks, but this definitely was a realization for me to know that I had at least two other options on how to use stereo imaging in my tracks. First of all, before I talk about the different types of ways we can use stereo imaging, we do need to establish what stereo imaging is. When we mix a track, it has a certain width to it, or at least a perceived width to it when you hear it in the speakers. It changes that perception from being this wide or this wide to this wide maybe, right? It all depends on how you set it. And also that can be set for different frequencies as well. So you can have the bass have a really wide footprint and the rest of it be kind of more compact. The reason I do it is because most, if not all, commercially mastered tracks have it. It's one of those things that really creates an immersive listening experience for the listener and separates an unmastered track from one that is really professionally done. So like I said, the first way to do it is just to mix everything as well as you can within reason and not mess with the stereo imaging at all, and let the mastering engineer take care of stereo imaging on the back end. There are two other ways to do it. You can also do the stereo imaging on the whole track yourself as a last step to your mix, so that you can have some control over how wide the stereo imaging needs to be. The third way is a little tricky. If you watched my previous video when I talked about side chaining, what I like to do is I put my stereo imager at the end of my side chaining chain, so that everything that is being ducked to go under the vocals, the bass drum, or the snare drum automatically gets widened out, and I leave those main three elements alone. I found that if you're not paying attention, your kick drum and your snare can get really, really mushy if you just randomly stereo spread everything as wide as it can go. So there's definitely an art to this, and you want to use your ears and use your instincts and make sure that you're making the right decision for your track. So we're here on the computer, and what I want to do is just walk you through what's already here. This is a track that I've been using for my whole mixing and mastering series. So the first thing I'm going to do is just let you hear the track with no stereo imaging, so we can just have a bass line to work with. Oh, I need a scratch vocal. Say I need something for me to mix. All right, so you get the gist. I had some fun with the vocal part on that. Now we're going to listen to what this would sound like with the first way that I would have this done traditionally, which is just putting that stereo imager on the back end of the whole process, including the mastering suite. Oh, I need a scratch vocal. Say I need something for me to mix. Oh, I need. Okay, so you can clearly tell from the readout that it's a much wider stereo image that we're working with now, and it's just spread all over the place. That can be a good thing or a bad thing, so we'll just keep that in mind as we go to the next two ways that we can do this. Also keep in mind that I'm using an Ozone 8 to just kind of keep track of things because I like to be able to see it, but Reason does have a free stereo imager, which is very effective. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off the stereo imager in the mastering suite, and I'm going to hear what the same imaging would sound like if it happened just on the whole track before we got to the mastering suite. Shouldn't be very different, but we'll see. Oh, I need a scratch. scratch vocal. Say I need something for me to mix. Okay, so right away, you'll notice a slight difference in the readout, right? So it's not being spread quite as much, or at least using the settings that I used. One advantage of the Ozone over Reason's factory stereo imager is that you get the readout, first of all, and then also you have 4 bands to control in terms of what gets wide and how wide. On the Reason version, you only have 2 bands to choose from, low and high. You can change the set point on what is low versus high, but you only have 2 options unless you just do some kind of wiring trickery, which is possible. But you know, it's a big headache compared to the ease of one device that has all that already present. Now, I will say for the record, if you do have the Ozone Suite and you try to use just the imager by itself, the imager that comes up does not have 4 bands. In fact, it only has 1 band. So Ozone, I guess, is trying to make you buy the suite. But even if you bought the suite and you only use the individual VST version, it only gives you 1 band. So I highly recommend, if you are going to grab the Ozone Suite, just go ahead and use the whole Ozone Suite, not the imaging kind of VST separately, because it has much less functionality. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I bypassed the stereo imager on the master and on the end of the mixing chain before the master. I'm going to go to that bus that I made just for ducking, and I've put an Ozone 8 at the end of that chain, so only the things that are being ducked are going to be spread out. So that means my kick and my snare and my lead vocal are pretty much going to be unaffected by this. So this is what it sounds like. I'm also going to put the exact same preset on my Ozone and get rid of anything else that might affect the sound. What I mean by that is the Ozone Suite can have a whole bunch of different devices in it, a maximizer, exciter, EQ, all these kinds of things in there. I don't want that for what I'm doing. I only want that one device, and that'll keep any other levels or anything from being messed with while I'm using it. Oh, I need a scratch vocal. Say I need something for me to mix. Oh, I need a scratch vocal. Said I need something for me to mix. Take it to the bridge. All right, I don't know if you noticed, I used the readout at first from the channel, which showed you the way that it was spreading out everything in the channel. But when I went to the readout on the master, you could see how we had this wide stereo image coming from that channel, but then there was this spike going right up the center from the kick drum that was making the kick just boom, just straight up the center. And that's what I really like for groove-oriented music, for my taste. Everybody has different flavors that they like. For me, that's the kind of setting that I really like to have. I like to have that kick drum and the snare drum and that vocal just slicing right up the middle. That makes sure that it's going to be heard clear. I don't have any peaking issues with them in terms of it being balanced, and everything else just gets spread nice and wide, so I still get that spacious feel. One thing to look out for on your readout, and this is also a way to kind of check your panning on things, is just to look at the readout and make sure it's not too heavily pushed to one side. You also don't want things to be too loud going to the stereo imager. You'll know that it's wrong if the whole semicircle is just lit up with blue, because the sound keeps on hitting basically the barrier, the peak point for the stereo imager. I know I'm a little late saying this. I hope you've been listening to this with headphones. If not, just go back and have another listen with nice headphones on so you can really experience the differences in the stereo field. If you like the way that I explained all of this today, then please hit the like button Hit the subscribe and the bell so you can know when I'm coming out with new content. Also, check out my website and everything I have on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Samuel Prather. Hopefully today I gave you a reason to create.